This is the U.S. Report with James Morrow.
Good evening and welcome to the program. Coming up tonight, border chaos becomes the new Republican battleground. Jennie Taer joins us soon with the latest. Plus, Nikki Haley goes to Nevada, bets the House, and loses big time. Is it finally time for her to drop out of the race? Please say yes. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. shows off his tough guy tactics. We'll find out what on earth he's doing here and a little bit later in the show. But first, Joe Biden is cracking under the pressure of age, office, and scandal. And I'll tell you what, it's not a pretty sight. On Thursday afternoon Washington time, a special counsel looking into Joe Biden's handling of classified documents released his report. And it did not make for pretty reading. But tell you what came next, what Biden did next, was so much worse. First, let me set this up for you. Now, as you probably know, Joe Biden had been under a cloud for his handling of classified documents that he had carelessly left around his Delaware home, including in his garage, where he also kept his prized classic Corvette. And finally, yesterday, a special counsel appointed by his own Justice Department handed down his report and, well, cleared him, said he didn't do anything wrong, which would be great, except for the reasoning behind the decision. You see, the special counsel said they wouldn't charge Joe Biden because Joe Biden wasn't mentally sharp enough to have known what he was doing, and in fact that he had only gotten worse since the investigation began. The report suggested that he was a, quote, well-meaning old man with a failing memory, and said that, quote, in his interview with our office, Mr. Biden's memory was worse. He did not remember when he was vice president, forgetting on the first day of the interview when his term ended, saying, if it was 2013, when did I stop being vice president, unquote, and forgetting on the second day of the interview when his term began, saying, in 2009, am I still vice president? Joe Biden also did not remember, even within several years, according to this report, when his son Beau died. And Joe Biden's memory appeared hazy when describing the Afghanistan debate that was once so important to him, unquote. So, the conclusion we now have to draw is that, at least according to this special counsel report, Joe Biden is not mentally competent to be charged with a crime involving his mishandling of classified documents, but he is somehow competent enough to be president of the United States. Someone explain this to me, please, because, of course, Joe Biden's mental failings would be no surprise to anyone who has been watching his presidency closely. Just this week, on two separate occasions, the president has claimed to have met while in office with France's François Mitterrand and Germany's Helmut Kohl, two leaders both long since deceased. Now, forgetting who is alive and who has left us is, by the way, a classic early sign of mental decline, according to countless medical and geriatric authorities. But instead of letting all of this go, Joe Biden insisted on calling the White House press corps to the diplomatic reception room at the White House on short notice because he wanted to make a statement. And I'll tell you what, more than a few of those members of the White House press corps thought that they were being called in to witness a resignation. You know, it would have gone something like, in light of the special counsel's comments and after consultations with my own family and so on and so forth. But no, instead of doing that, Joe Biden doubled down. He's going to fight this. Have a look.
As you know, the special counsel released his findings today about their look into my handling of classified documents. I was pleased to see he reached a firm conclusion that no charges should be brought against me in this case. This was an exhaustive investigation going back more than 40 years, even into the 1970s when I was still a new United States Senator.
Even if he had left it just there, you might say, fair enough. But things started to go downhill really fast, especially here when the president hit back at the special counsel for talking about his inability to remember the date of the death of his son Beau, whom the president has previously and on multiple occasions incorrectly claimed died while serving in Iraq.
How in the hell dare he raise that? Frankly, when I was asked the question, I thought to myself, it wasn't any of their damn business. Let me tell you something. Some of you have commented, I wear since the day he died, every single day, the rosary he got from Our Lady of... Every Memorial Day we hold a service remembering him, attended by friends and family and the people who loved him.
Our Lady of what, Mr. President? I don't know. I mean, look, that was pretty bad, but then bizarrely, the president then decided he wanted to take questions, which again went a bit as well as you could have predicted.
President Biden, something the special counsel said in his report is that one of the reasons you were not charged is because, in his description, you are a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory.
I'm well-meaning, and I'm an elderly man, and I know what the hell I'm doing. I've been president. I put this country back on its feet. I don't need his recommendation. It's totally
How bad is your memory, and can you continue as president?
My memory is so bad I let you speak.
What does that even mean? And the damage still wasn't done. Pretty soon, Joe Biden was fighting with the press, and it just turned into a free-for-all.
That is your judgment. That is your judgment. That is not the judgment of the press.
They expressed concerns about your mental acuity. They say that you are too old. Mr. President, in December, you told me that you believe there are many other Democrats who could defeat Donald Trump. So why does it have to be you now? What is your answer to that question?
Because I'm the most qualified person in this country to be president of the United States and finish the job I started.
Do you believe that, guys? Why are you confusing the names of world leaders?
Thank you, everyone.
I did not share classified information.
And he still wasn't done. Then he took the bait from a braying press corps, and after leaving the podium, got brought back to talk about Israel and the Middle East. And then this happened.
As you know, initially, the president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in.
That's right. He managed to confuse the presidents of Egypt and Mexico. Southern border, Gaza border. What's the difference? Anyway, this was one of the most bizarre displays I have ever seen in literally a lifetime of being around and watching and working in and around politics. Literally, all the White House needed to do here was put out a statement. The president is pleased by the report of the special counsel finding that he did not intentionally mishandle classified documents. We trust this is the end of the matter. Full stop. Yet, having just watched that performance, I'm of the belief that this is exactly what his staff wanted the president to do. But instead, Joe Biden let his temper get the better of him, and he sent out the order. Bring in the press! I'll stare him down. Was always going to end in disaster. Remember, the White House has put such a tight lid on the president that he is now not even allowed to conduct his usual lighthearted interview about the Super Bowl. So terrified is his staff that Joe Biden could not even handle a little light banter about football without melting down or having a brain fade or otherwise embarrassing himself in front of hundreds of millions of viewers. What happened just hours ago at the White House is, I think, frankly, the beginning of the end of the Joe Biden presidency. There is simply no way that this man can withstand the rigors of a campaign, much less another 4 years in office. It is time for his family, for his friends, for the Democratic Party to gather together and deliver him a message. Mr. President, Joe, it's time to go. Now, joining me now to discuss all of this and more is political journalist John Fund. John, I want to ask you right off the bat of this interview, Joe Biden has, for a second year in a row, declined to do a Super Bowl interview. I'm asking if this has anything to do with the fact that he is now misidentifying world leaders and forgetting who is dead, beyond all the problems that we've seen out of that Department of Justice report.
Well, that's no longer cause for speculation. The Justice Department for the past year has had a special counsel investigate Joe Biden's mishandling of classified documents, a parallel case on some of the facts to what is pursuing Donald Trump. The report was issued today, and the special counsel declined to recommend criminal charges against Joe Biden, despite the fact that he clearly and willingly appropriated classified documents and misused them, giving them to a ghostwriter for his book, by the way. But the reason that the special counsel said he would not recommend criminal charges is that Joe Biden's appearance and manner was that of a confused elderly person with an extremely poor memory who could not remember even basic facts like when he was vice president, when he became president, when his son Beau died, or who knows what else he didn't remember. This is a report from the Biden Justice Department. It was signed off by the Attorney General for Biden, Merrick Garland. It is a devastating report, and it puts in black and white what everyone has been whispering about behind the scenes in Washington. Joe Biden has lost 3, 4, or 5 steps and is not prepared to serve as president for the next 5 years, which would be the time period where he reelected.
So, John, you say quite correctly, this is coming from his own Justice Department. So this isn't a political hit job. These are his own people saying this. The calls are coming from inside the House. Is it time to invoke the constitutional provisions that allow for a president to remove himself or be removed from office if he is physically or mentally incapable of going on with the job?
Well, let me make clear, the report from the Justice Department is from a special counsel who was appointed to avoid the appearance of a conflict of interest. But the special counsel was appointed by the Biden Justice Department and frankly has bipartisan track record. As for the 25th Amendment, I think that would be very, very messy because, of course, the 25th Amendment to replace Biden with his vice president would elevate Kamala Harris to the presidency of the United States. I don't know if there's anyone in Washington who thinks that would be, shall we say, a step up.
Yeah, indeed. But, you know, we're seeing also politically that if Joe Biden goes to November as the candidate, the Democrats have another problem. He's hit another new low of 37% in his approval rating in the latest NBC poll. Those pollsters are warning that the results show, and this is NBC saying, quote, a presidency in peril. It also has Trump leading by 5 in the overall general election. Are panic stations, what are you hearing, John? Are Democrats at absolute panic stations now about the future of this presidency and the election?
Yes, but they take solace in the fact that Donald Trump has often made mistakes of his own during a campaign, and maybe something will turn up. Maybe the social media networks will gear up their censorship programs and try to block messages even more than they did in 2022. Maybe there will be intelligence leaks from the community damaging to Donald Trump. Anything can happen. But for right now, they're stuck because they are a host of ambitious Democrats who would like to be the presidential candidate, but there's not an obvious way to both convince Joe Biden to step down and to convince Kamala Harris that she should do something for the good of the party and not run.
So, John, talk me through who would be, you know, we know Gavin Newsom obviously is a very leading contender for that sort of thing, although California is a disaster area and doesn't really speak well to his own administrative abilities. Who would be some other Democrats that we should maybe be keeping an eye on and looking at as potential people who would want to step in if things continue to get worse?
Well, the curse of identity politics, which is now gripping the Democratic Party, is this. 63% of Democratic primary voters are either women or minorities. That means you cannot remove someone like Kamala Harris, the first black female vice president, very easily. That would create tremendous disruption in the party and drive down turnout. So Gavin Newsom is out. He is a pasty white male. Many other candidates are out for that reason. The only ticket that I have heard is Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, combined either with Raphael Warnock, the senator from Georgia, or Governor Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland, who might placate black and female voters, that their identity charisma charm has been removed from office, would be that kind of ticket. Otherwise, they're stuck, because if you live by the identity politics sword, you're going to be punished by the identity politics sword.
Now, joining me now is former White House Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor at Bondi Partners, Mick Mulvaney. Mick, massive stuff coming out of this Department of Justice report on classified documents. We've got to start with this absolutely damning details of this report. They have called him, the special counsel has called him, Joe Biden, a sympathetic, well-meaning, elderly man with a poor memory. Now, this sounds like a description of the guy who sits and feeds the pigeons in my local park, but I wouldn't want him to be president. More damningly, the report also says Joe Biden's memory had significant limitations and that this recorded conversation, often painfully slow, with Mr. Biden struggling to remember events and at times straining to read and rely on his own notebook entries in 2017 conversations with Mark Zwonitzer, who helped him write 2 memoirs. Mick, 2 questions for you. Number one, does this prove what I have said for a long time, that other people, particularly Barack Obama, are really running the show in this White House? And number 2, with this sort of official judgment on his faculties, how long can Joe Biden continue as president?
Let's take the second one first, James. They're both good and fair questions. He can continue as president as long as those around him want him to. There's only really 1 or 2 mechanisms for removing a president of the United States. And unless he's committed a high crime or misdemeanor and wants to resign under his own terms, the only other way to do it is by having the cabinet vote him out. And that is the method that is sort of contemplated under the 25th Amendment, that if a president is of diminished capacity, the cabinet would get together and get rid of him. Keep in mind, every time that Donald Trump slipped up and said 1 instead of 2 or Monday instead of Tuesday, the media here was demanding that the cabinet kick him out using the 25th Amendment. So we're all very familiar with that mechanism, thanks to the media left here in this country. Now, to your first question, who's really running the show? It's a fair question. It's not the Obama people. Keep in mind, they don't like each other. Barack Obama famously said one time, don't underestimate Joe's ability to blank things up. There's no love lost between the 2 teams, between the 2 men. There's probably more people from the Clinton administration advising Joe Biden right now than there are from the Obama administration. But the bottom line is, it's the the Biden team by themselves, and that's one of the reasons they're screwing up as badly as they are.
But, Mick, there's so much stuff in this that is damning, and it seems to put the left and the Democrats in the White House in a real double bind, because in this, it says Joe Biden admitted that he found classified documents, I think, under the stairs in his house and other places. So he's admitted to it, and yet they said we can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this is something worth charging him with, simply because, essentially, they said his mental capacity seems to be diminished, so they couldn't really charge him with knowing what he was doing. If they go and charge Trump with this stuff, that means they're saying, well, Trump has mental capacity, but what Trump has been saying about Biden, that he doesn't, is correct.
And now you moved on to the politics of it, which is just as fascinating as the practicalities and the legalities of it. Here's what just happened today with this report. Donald Trump's sort of liability related to his documents case went down dramatically. The Department of Justice has admitted they are not going to charge Joe Biden for offenses that look to be much more serious than what we've heard about the charges against Donald Trump. These documents were a lot more serious. They had to deal with things happening in Afghanistan. They were documents that he's had for a long time. They're documents that he had out in his garage where the public could see it. In fact, there's a video online now where you can go and you can watch him backing his car out of his garage, and you can see the documents on the internet, or at least the box that they are in. So this is really going to have a dramatic political impact, helping Donald Trump on his documents case, dealing with his documents Mar-a-Lago. But your larger point is the one that everybody's talking about here right now, which is can Joe Biden continue to run for office when even his own Department of Justice says he comes across as a doddering old man, because that's what this report says.
Well, and I mean, this would seem to be a complete campaign ad for Trump, or whoever runs against him, because it says, he wasn't across the details of the Afghanistan debate, which he was intimately involved in. He couldn't remember when his term as vice president was and when he started as president. He had trouble with dates, including not being able to place in time the death of his son, Beau, which would, of course, be a terrible and traumatic event for anybody. People will obviously be asking the question, is he at all capable of running for president and staying in for another 4 years? This would seem to be a gift to the Republicans, whoever it is, presumably Trump.
And you and I have talked a lot over the course of the last 6-8 months about, would there be a dramatic event that would prompt the Democrat Party to get together and say, now we really need to do this. Is too far. This is gone now. We have to figure out who else is going to run for president, because it cannot be Joe Biden. I still think they cannot do that before the convention in July and August. But my guess is, and it's an educated guess, those conversations are happening in a bunch of Democrat leadership offices as of tonight, because this is going to be a major, major problem politically for the Democrats. And let's remember one thing, James, and you hate to say this, but it's the truth. He's not going to get better. President Biden is not going to he's going to continue to get worse, and everybody knows it.
Yeah. Now, I want to talk about some other political stuff that's been happening here, too. Nevada. Now, we've spoken about Nikki Haley and her attempts to unseat Donald Trump for the nomination, or at least make trouble for him. They had a non-binding primary in Nevada this week. None of the above beat Nikki Haley by more than a 2-1 margin. Who is still coming out for her? Why is she still in this? Are we going to see her pull the pin before South Carolina, or will she at least stick through that one?
Yeah, well, the folks that are coming out for her now, and keep in mind, Nevada is strange because they're one of 3 states that have a caucus and a primary. I wasn't even familiar with that until this year, so it's very, very strange. He wasn't on the ballot in this primary. She won't be on the ballot in the caucus. It's just bizarre. But the bottom line is this: there are more pro-Trump people right now than anti-Trump people. You asked the question, who's turning out for Nikki Haley? It is the anti-Trump wing of the party, and that's about a 65-35 type of break right now. That's where she is, James, more importantly than Nevada, in South Carolina, her home state. She's about 3 weeks away from that election, and she is still down by 25 points in the polls.
That's just amazing. Now, I want to ask you very quickly about one other thing that's been happening the last few hours. The Supreme Court has been hearing arguments around whether or not Colorado can kick Donald Trump off the ballot. Now, the questioning seems to have gone very poorly for the Colorado attorney who was arguing the case that he should be removed from the ballot, with even Jonathan Turley saying that it was the left justices who seem to have some of the worst attacks on their arguments. Is this going to put an end to this whole thing where people say, oh, well, to protect our democracy, we can't have democracy?
Yeah, I think it is. In fact, there's a lot of discussion now about this possibly being a 9-0 decision at the Supreme Court to keep Trump on the ballot in Colorado. And once that happens, all the other state objections probably are going to melt away. That would be something. In this day and age, in our United States Supreme Court, a 9-0 decision on any topic is increasingly rare. So if a 9-0 decision comes out for Donald Trump on this ballot measure, my guess is that will put a pin in this debate, and it will be finished, and we'll move on to the next round of lawsuits, including whether or not the president is immune from these from sorts of criminal actions as a private citizen.
Mick Mulvaney, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much. But boy, there's a lot going on. Thank you so much for your time and your analysis. Don't go anywhere, because in a moment we're going to be talking to Jennie Taer about the crisis on the southern border. But first, let's talk about Robert F. Kennedy, the Democrat turned independent who is turning voters and heads on both sides of the aisle with, among other things, his outdoorsy tough guy reputation. How tough? Wrangling a rattlesnake tough. Have a look. Whew, tough guy. Hey, don't try this at home, kids. Seriously. But as Kennedy himself said, quote, "This is how I'll wrangle the snakes come January 2025. Well, we'll see. We could sure do worse. Jennie Taer next. Welcome back to the program. Now, the chaos at the U.S. southern border now has some competition from the chaos in Washington, D.C., where the Biden White House's attempt to push through a phony try at quote-unquote fixing the border has fallen over in a heap after Republicans and a handful of Democrats voted against it. But while that border bill has gone away, the problem of the border has not. The border crisis, which has made itself felt in every major Democratic-run so-called sanctuary city, from New York to Boston to Chicago to San Francisco, is now a national issue. And it is safe to say that this is exactly the ground Trump wants to fight the election from. Just check out his new campaign ad.
6 men have been charging that brutal attack caught on camera.
A shocking act of violence.
2 NYPD officers beaten in Times Square.
All of those arrested were released without bail.
Why did these 4 individuals be released on their own recognizance?
The Biden administration is fighting to release as many migrants as quickly as possible.
I'll reverse Trump's detrimental asylum policies.
There's no need for us.
Biden administration's reversed Trump's policy on remain in Mexico.
Joe Biden to stop construction of the border wall.
It's a new day on the southern border. Here we go. The policy that made it easy to kick out migrants is gone.
He inherited the lowest rate of illegal immigration, and he immediately reinstated catch and release. And so when they apprehend people, they let them go.
I'll reverse Trump's detrimental asylum policies.
Strong stuff, because since taking office, Joe Biden, who as president has, remember, the statutory and executive authority to shut down the border, has done everything he can to open that same border to illegals and so-called asylum seekers. Remember, within Joe Biden's first month of taking office in 2021, he signed nearly 36 executive orders weakening the border and rescinding the policies that Donald Trump had put in place during his first term of office to secure that border. And really, who's surprised here? I mean, remember, during a Democratic primary debate in 2019, the candidates were asked to raise a hand if they supported decriminalizing illegal border crossing. Nearly every single one did, including our man, Joe Biden.
Raise your hand if you think it should be a civil offense rather than a crime to cross a border without documentation. Can we keep the hands up so we can see them?
And indeed, it's not hard to think that Democrats believe illegal aliens, not American citizens and lawful residents, are the left's true priority. Don't take my word for it. Listen to Senator Chris Murphy here. He's an official Biden campaign surrogate, and he's gone and said the quiet part loud.
The negotiation didn't have a path to citizenship. It was entirely on their terms in order to get Ukraine funding, right?
Well, I mean, Chris, that's been a failed play for 20 years. So you are right that that has been the Democratic strategy for 30 years, maybe. And it has failed to deliver for the people we care about most, the undocumented Americans that are in this country.
Did you hear that? The Democrat strategy has failed to deliver amnesty, a path to citizenship for the people they care most about. The undocumented Americans that are in the country. As I always say, when people tell you who they are, believe them. Joining me now is the Daily Caller's immigration reporter, Jennie Taer. Jennie, massive moves in Congress this week and in the Senate, with the Senate border bill falling apart, being rejected. Talk us through this a little bit and why exactly Republicans were so keen to say no.
Right, exactly. So you had a bipartisan group in the Senate that negotiated this deal actually with the help of Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, who the House tried to impeach, of course, this week. So an interesting group of negotiators that crafted this bill that they said kind of met enough of the needs of each party, each side, to be able to come to the table that they thought could pass the Senate and possibly the House. Well, that bill came out, and we found out that the promises, some of the biggest promises, such as ending catch and release, really weren't true. So releasing illegal aliens is still happening under this bill. That was like a big issue for the Republican Party and, of course, the House. So you have House Speaker Mike Johnson saying, absolutely, this is dead on arrival, and a number of others in leadership in the Republican conference in the House.
And Jenny, explain something to me here which I had trouble at understanding as I was reading the bill in its various draft iterations. They kept saying, oh, well, you can shut down the border after a certain number of migrants cross. But the question I think a lot of Americans and people watching from outside America is if you have the power to shut the border at that point, why not just simply shut the border full stop and put an end to this border crisis?
Right. It definitely puts this limit, and I think that the issue is that there are a lot of loopholes to that. So when I talked to Border Patrol agents about this deal, they saw that exactly for what it was. If someone comes across and they say they have a credible fear of returning to their country and they're a single adult, they could still be released. If they come as a family unit, they will be released. So those are big issues, and people will adapt to those things. Let's say if they're not a family unit, maybe they'll, claim to be a fake family unit. Yeah. Or maybe you have people that come across and largely a lot of times people who say they have asylum claims or credible fears, it ends up getting adjudicated, and actually most of the time it gets rejected by an immigration judge. But of course, again, the process right now is so overstretched and overwhelmed that it's going to be hard to be able to make that happen quickly under such a deal in the chaos at the border.
And Jenny, I want to talk to you about this particular issue in particular, because I think it's really clear to people, we need to make clear to people that, it's not just necessarily all people who have good intentions and want to make a better life for themselves, which of course everybody in an immigrant nation understands. But this week you revealed exclusively on the Daily Caller that Border Patrol agents released more than 30,000 migrants who crossed the southern border who were deemed as potential national security risks over the past 15 months. That's a shocking number. Tell us a bit more about this. How did you find this out? What sort of people are we talking about?
Right. So this is something called the Special Interest Alien List. It encompasses a number of nationalities that they could consider migrants from those countries to be of national security concern, whether it's due to terror ties or travel patterns in areas that are tied to terrorism. Things like that. It often goes back to terrorism and other national security risks. And so these people are flagged by the system, but it appears that catch and release also happens for these folks. The largest nationality under this list that was encountered is Turkish migrants. And I recently actually found myself in a number of Telegram channels where Turkish smugglers were recruiting migrants from across the globe to come across the southern border and had a very lucrative enterprise of charging people $10,000 a pop, arranging their travel almost like a travel agency and getting them across the southern border and showing it on TikTok to prospective customers to continue this pipeline. So this is not just one or two people coming across. It's creating entire enterprises for criminal and smuggling organizations.
And of course, people who come in who are on this sort of list and are, wanted by authorities for other things, and they're not deported, and then the news gets back, that's only going to encourage more such people. Then this sounds like there will never be any way to really realistically deport people, even if they have been on terror watch lists. Is America now stuck with potentially, well, I don't want to be alarmist, but even, potential sleeper cells and things like that within its own borders?
I don't think it's alarmist at this point because we recently reported on an al-Shabaab terrorist that crossed the southern border in March, was apprehended by Border Patrol, and was deemed a mismatch on the terror watch list, which actually ended up not being true. He was actually a member of al-Shabaab. They didn't find that out until after they released him almost a year later in January. Just last month, ICE nabbed him in Minnesota. He was actually not only a member of the terrorist organization, but he was involved in weapons and firearms and explosive manufacturing and movement. And so what was someone like that doing in the country for almost a year? And that's something that I don't think is just a one-off case.
Now, we're going to take a short break in a moment, but first, you hear a lot about how bad crime is in a lot of American cities. Well, check this out. This is footage from Oakland, California just this week of a man walking into an Apple store and yanking 49 iPhones off their security cables and stealing them, presumably to feed his starving family or something like that. You see him stuffing them down his pants and walking out the door with them in broad daylight. And at the end of the clip, you'll see he even walks past a police car. Now, things being what they are, no one intervened, not even store employees. Though, of course, we know that when employees have tried to stop theft in the past, they have been the ones to get in trouble, get fired, and lose their job. Now, naturally, of course, someone did film the whole thing, even if they didn't intervene. So, it's another day in the life of Oakland, California, and so many other American cities where businesses are packing up and leaving rather than deal with the Democrat dysfunction and crime. Gerard Baker, after the break. Welcome back to the program. Now, have I got a real treat for you? Wall Street Journal editor-at-large and author of American Breakdown, Gerard Baker. And don't let his accent fool you. He is one of the keenest observers of American politics and life there is. Gerard, thanks so much for coming on the program. Before we get into some of the other issues, we've had this breaking news about the Department of Justice and their report into Joe Biden, which I think is frankly really damning. I mean, if they were saying some of this stuff about, my own father, for example, I'd be saying, Dad, you can't drive the car anymore, much less have the nuclear football. What was your reaction, and what do you think this says about the prognosis of the Biden presidency?
Well, first, James, thanks very much again for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you. I agree with you. I think this is pretty devastating on 2 or 3 levels, really. The first thing to say is that, of course, the special counsel who was appointed to look into Biden's handling of classified documents after he left the vice presidency in 2017. It's very interesting, obviously, because it has that direct parallel with Donald Trump, who's being prosecuted for his handling of classified documents after he left the White House in 2021. So the first problem, I think, for Biden here is that, I mean, while on the one hand, the special counsel says, we're not going to prosecute. He does say very clearly he did mishandle these documents. He willfully retained documents that he knew he shouldn't have, which is exactly the same crime that Donald Trump is accused of doing. And yet he's not going to be prosecuted. So there's the double standard problem right off the bat. Donald Trump's been making this argument for 2 years that he's being persecuted by his political enemies while his political enemies have been doing the same kind of stuff and getting away with it. This is absolutely, in his view and to his supporters, proof positive of that. The second real problem with this, though, of course, James, is that, as you say, the reason the special prosecutor Robert Hur gives for not prosecuting, one of the main reasons he gives for not submitting charges or recommending charges. Now, Trump wouldn't face charges. Sorry, Biden wouldn't face charges while in office, but he would face them at the end of his term of office if they were to lodge charges against him. The reason the prosecutor's saying no, he shouldn't face charges is because he's not mentally capable. There are many instances in the report saying, basically we can't really hold him accountable for this because he can't remember anything. He can't remember, again, you probably just heard this, he can't remember the dates of his vice presidency. He was interviewed back in October. He couldn't remember when he was vice president. He couldn't remember when his son, tragically, Beau Biden, died within a few years of the day of him dying. So the reason for not prosecuting Joe Biden or recommending a prosecution of Joe Biden is that he's deemed mentally incapable. And, somebody joked earlier, just speaking to just a little bit this afternoon, this is great news for Donald Trump because Donald Trump now has a new slogan. Hey, vote for me. At least I'm mentally capable of standing trial.
It's an absolutely amazing and shocking state of affairs in that double bind now that it puts absolutely everybody in. But before we've talked about this, but I want to talk about also this other big issue tonight on the program, which is immigration. And you've written a really interesting, I think, piece in the Wall Street Journal that puts this in the context of something else we talk about a lot here, which is the elites. And you say that, you know, while everything looks bad with this migration process and problem in not just the U.S., but the U.K., and we've had problems in Australia as well, you say we are witnessing a powerful indictment of a political and cultural elite whose hegemony is long overdue to meet its nemesis. Basically, that the people who have saddled us with this immigration crisis are due for a reckoning. Tell us how that's playing out in the United States and globally as well.
Well, James, I know this has been a big issue in Australia. As you say, it's been a very big issue in the UK, and it's huge here in the United States. Look, for the last 3 years, we've had a Democratic administration, which, when it came in, literally on day one, the first things that Joe Biden did, he issued a series of executive orders which lifted the restrictions that Donald Trump had put in place over to prevent migrants coming across the southern border and being able essentially to come into the U.S. essentially without any kind of apprehension of any serious nature. He lifted those restrictions. In the 3 years since, James, we've had, well, anyway, the estimates vary, but everybody agrees the official data are at least 5 or 6 million at least crossing the border in 3 years, coming into the country. Many of them are processed, and then because they're claiming asylum under the law, and especially under the way that Joe Biden's been enforcing the law, they're allowed into the country. So we've had this explosion of illegal immigration into the United States. You've seen it, and it's become a big issue in the last year because initially, obviously, it was a big problem for the border states like Texas and Arizona, to some extent California. They've now got many of these immigrants right into the heartland of America.
Sure.
They go and they apply. I'm in New York City. We have thousands and thousands of migrants being housed in temporary accommodation. This is a crisis. It's an economic crisis on one level because it's causing tremendous strain on cities who have to house many of these migrants, have to feed them and house them and give them basic welfare resources. It's obviously a huge national security problem because millions of people are coming across the United States border. By the way, they're not just all Mexicans and Central Americans. They're the ones that we know about. Hundreds of thousands coming from Africa, tens of thousands from the Middle East and other places. And they are an enormous threat. We saw what happened in Israel on October the 7th. People are starting to raise the possibility that so many of these people coming across the border will have, bad intent and may well be, supported by terrorist organizations or terrorist supporting states. But my point in that column, James, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say is that, with all of that there, there's this whole issue where we've seen, not just the national security, but crime, real bizarre crimes and things we've never seen before, like cops being beaten up on the street. It seems like this sort of deliberate choice to open up the nation, because that's what it is, a deliberate choice, is really demoralizing Americans and, frankly, people in other countries that are in the same thing. How much of this is a deliberate choice to demoralize people and basically say, hey, we're in charge? And is this the reckoning that's finally going to come?
Yeah, it's a deliberate choice, James. It is a choice. Again, and Biden made it very clear when he came into office. He basically put a sign up at the border, metaphorically speaking, saying to everybody, come on in. The United States is open. We're no longer that wicked, horrible Donald Trump who kept you out. Come on in. We're a welcoming country. And surprise, surprise, they came in. They did that. Now, again, you don't have to believe, some people do, I don't. You don't have to believe this is some great plot to kind of replace the existing population of the United States or Western Europe, because it's going on in Europe too. In particular, we've seen these terrible cases in Britain in the last week. You don't have to believe it's some great plot. What I do believe, and I just take them at their own word, this progressive left that is making these decisions, whether it is in the United States, whether it's in Australia, whether it's in Britain, this sort of progressive, and by the way, when I say left, I define that very broadly. I mean, you have a conservative government in Britain, which seems to be doing exactly the same thing, basically allowing these people in. The ideology is, borders are a terrible thing. We have a great obligation to the poor of the world, to the huddled masses of the world, the people who are persecuted. We've got to let them all in. Borders are immoral. National sovereignty is immoral. We're all part of one great big world. Yeah, nice idea if you like it. I don't particularly, but it has practical consequences, and we're seeing those practical consequences on the streets of major cities right now, and it's a disaster. And I do think a reckoning is coming. And again, whether it's the election this year and what happens after that, whether it's look at what's happening in Europe, James. You know, the media keep calling them these far-right parties, anti-immigrant parties, because they've had enough. They've had enough of their borders being open to all comers.
Gerard Baker, we're going to have to leave it there. I could chat about this stuff all night. Thank you so much for your time. Now, after the break, a very special Only in America where we take a trip to woke kindergarten. That's right. But before we do, Eric Adams, mayor of New York, says that he is being attacked for running his city into the ground. Not because he stupidly decided to declare the Big Apple a sanctuary city, leading to a crime crisis and a housing crisis and a healthcare crisis and a sanitation crisis and a schools crisis, but because his opponents are making a big deal about the diversity of his administration. Sorry, Mr. Mayor, but who exactly is making race an issue here?
Stand up. They need to see you. Deputy Mayor Williams Isom, Deputy Mayor Mira Josie, Deputy Mayor Amazar, Deputy Mayor Maria Torres Springer. Have you ever seen this much chocolate leading the city of New York? And then go down the line. Look who's here. This is representative of the city. That's why people are hating on me.
It gets better. He also declared himself, well, almost Christ-like.
How many of you go to church? Ma'am, this is a Matthew 21:12 moment. Jesus walked in the temple. He saw them doing wrong in the temple. He did what? He turned the table over. I went to City Hall to turn the table over.
Yeah, Eric Adams. He's bigger than Jesus. Well, almost. I mean, hey, that worked so well for the Beatles. Only in America is next. Let's travel back to San Francisco, which is basically an open-air guide to how to make one of the most lovely cities in the planet and turn it into the love child of Mad Max and Mao's Cultural Revolution. I'm not kidding either. San Francisco educators have brought in a company called, no joke, Woke Kindergarten, and paid them hundreds of thousands of dollars to teach the kids. Well, have a look.
No Donald Trump! No Donald Trump! No Donald Trump! No Donald Trump!
Now, you wouldn't be surprised to learn that this is their founder.
White supremacy destroys for the sake of destruction. Abolition destroys for the sake of creation. We are not the same. I have an unwavering respect for children, an unwavering love and care and compassion for children, a commitment to children and to their freedom, to their learning, to their lives, to sustaining their lives. Y'all are the demons. Y'all are the villains. We've been trying to end y'all, get free of y'all.
Nor would you be surprised to find out that the schools that brought in Woke Kindergarten to improve their scores have in fact gone backwards even further. Math and English scores actually hit new lows last spring, with less than 4% of students proficient in math and just under 12% at grade level in English, a decline of about 4 percentage points in each category, according to our friends at the San Francisco Chronicle. So what have they done? Well, they went woke, but now it's their kids, who have no education to speak of, who will go broke. But at least they know how to hate Trump. Anyway, that's all the time we have for this week. See you next Friday. And in the meantime, let's be careful out there. Bye-bye.